Podcast LIPI Press, podcast penerbit ilmiah masa kini. Halo sahabat LIPI and welcome back to LIPI Press Podcast. I'm your host, Ananda Fatrahman Bintang. And today, we enter the 5th episode, which also coincides with the National Book Day. And may I remind you, this episode will be different from our previous episodes we've put out. And guess what? Today's episode is going to be conducted in full English, as we will talk about LIPI Press and Springer's collaboration. You know, as we're celebrating National Book Day today, it's necessary to pay attention to people behind the scenes that have made it possible to bring books into our hands. As a scientific publishing house, Springer has helped a lot of authors spreading their words into the minds of their readers' mind. Since 2016, LIPI Press and Springer have worked together to promote books worldwide. This global publishing partnership has helped more Indonesian authors to reach the world through their publications. And yes, sahabat LIPI, today's episode is also very special because we're having two amazing guests today that will deliver insightful information, especially about publishing. For this episode, we've invited two amazing speakers to talk about LIPI Press and Springer. Now, without further ado, let's begin and welcome our amazing speakers for this podcast. Mrs. Novi Indrasari of LIPI Press and Mrs. Alex Campbell of Springer. Wow, it is quite an honor to be with you two here today. How are you two doing in this wonderful day?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks. Yeah,
Yes,
really
thank
good.
you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me too.
Wow, yeah. Wow, it's an honor to be with you here today. I'll say that again. And I'm really glad that you two are here, and I'm quite thirsty for knowledge from the both of you. But first things first, I would like to thank the two of you for taking your time to attend this podcast and sharing your insight and knowledge for Sahabat LIPI and the people all around the world. Again, thank you, and it is an honor. And now, with that settled down, let's just get down to the business, shall we? Off with the first question. Mrs. Novi, since we will discuss about the publishing collaboration carried out by LIPI Press and Springer, can you, as a representative of LIPI Press, tell the beginning of the collaboration between LIPI Press and Springer? You know, about how it all started. And we all know that somewhere out there are many sahabat LIPI who are dying of curiosity. Please, ma'am, the time is yours.
Okay, well, thank you for the question. This cooperation was initiated at the end of 2015 when our previous director, Ibu Rahmi Lestari Helmi, went to Germany to attend Frankfurt Book Fair. She discussed the possibility of co-publishing with the Springer's director. From that meeting, we agreed that LIPI Press and Springer would cooperate under the co-publishing scheme. Honestly speaking, it's a huge opportunity for us because for LIPI Press, it's our first experience having such a global partnership. Until now, there have been 12 titles selected for the co-publishing books. And of course, we are expecting more titles. And so besides co-publishing, we also held an annual publishing forum where we talk about various topics covering the publication, scientific publication. For example, last year, we invited 3 speakers from Springer, including Alex, to discuss about books, journals, and also open access. And we really hope that this year we can hold similar event again.
Oh, all right. That is just hell of a story to tell the people, right? I know from the start that this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership indeed. Thank you. Now we shift our attention to the next speaker, Mrs. Alex Campbell. So, ma'am, thank you again for being here. We all know that somewhere out there are so many sahabat LIPI who want to publish or make their works internationally accessible. Seeing you here as Springer's representative, what are the procedures in this case for Springer to finally publish their works?
Thanks for the question. And again, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to work with Novia and with LIPI Press. And as Novia's mentioned, our partnership began, well, officially in 2016. And we were really pleased to renew this partnership in 2019. The reason I want to, firstly, emphasize the partnership is the way that books are published with Springer Separately, when it's just with Springer or with LIPI Press and Springer as a co-publishing collaboration, the process is slightly different. So I will start with just the Springer process in isolation. Ordinarily, authors would approach the publishing editor, such as myself. I'm the publishing editor for the Humanities and Social Sciences in Southeast and East Asia. So, of course, I'm only dealing with those disciplines. We've got different editors handling different disciplines. So the most important thing is, of course, to approach the right editor. You start by just going to the Springer website and, going through the different editors and their profiles and which disciplines they work in. I also always recommend having a look at the books list that Springer is publishing. So under Springer Nature, which is the holding company of Springer, we do have different brands, or what we call imprints. So within the Humanities and Social Sciences, we also have Palgrave Macmillan, we have Springer. On the sciences side, of course, we've got Nature, the journal, and Biomedical Central. So we've got different brands. It's important to also show an awareness of that and also be quite clear that your work is going to fit the imprint that you are proposing to. So then you would put forward a short synopsis to a publishing editor, discuss the concept for the book, and then proceed to a proposal, which would involve usually submitting at least 2 sample chapters or a draft manuscript if you have it available. We then develop that proposal, put the documents together, and proceed to 2 rounds of peer review, which is single blind. So that means they know who you are as an author, but you obviously don't know the identity of the reviewers. 2 rounds, we then evaluate the peer review reports, and at that point we'll make a decision on whether to issue a contract or not. We also allow authors their own timeline to decide the date of submission. So once the manuscript is completed according to that timeline and submitted, there's another 2 rounds of peer review, and if all is favorable, then we proceed to production, which is about 4 months. So that's the ordinary process, but of course with LIPI, it's slightly different in that, of course, because it's a collaboration, the conversation is ongoing between both LIPI Press and Springer. So in the case of this collaboration, Novi and I have always worked together quite closely, looking at LIPI's list, LIPI Press's list, in terms of what titles are being published, both in English under LIPI Press and in Bahasa Indonesia, that might lend itself themselves to translation. So translation, and then this will come up later, I'm sure, is a huge challenge, and it comes with its own challenges in terms of timeline. So we see obviously translated titles taking a lot longer than English language titles or titles that are originally written in English, but the same process still applies. So the key part of the collaboration is identifying those titles which we think are going to fit Springer, that LIPI Press has already published, and identifying those titles that will have a regional or global readership. Again, the same process of peer review still follows, but yeah, that is very much part of the conversation. So the conversation is not just limited to the publishing editor, such as myself. It's obviously it's hand in hand with LIPI Press throughout the course of the publishing process. And when the book is published, of course, it's being published under 2 different brands, or co-published under 2 brands, both LIPI Press and Springer.
Okay, you hear that, guys? There you are, your answer. Hope that quenches your thirst for knowledge a bit, yeah? All right, now then, I want to ask Mrs. Novi. In earlier, we already knew about the publishing procedures from Springer. Can you explain the job description of LIPI Press Publishing in collaboration with Springer, ma'am?
Yeah, sure. So some of the things have been delivered by Alex, just emphasize some parts of it. So we have different roles in terms of co-publishing. For LIPI Press part, we are responsible for the translation process, as mostly the manuscripts are still in Indonesian. And besides, we also have the right to propose the titles to Springer for the co-publishing books. And for the dissemination, Springer holds the full right to disseminate the books for the global market, while LIPI Press, we have the right to disseminate the books for Indonesian market. Basically, that's our roles.
I see. Very detailed and disciplined description indeed, if I had to say so myself. Now, I want you two to be honest. In your opinion, how do you see the state of a literary publication in the full era of 4.0? You know, with the information on videos, pictures, or podcasts. All right, maybe Mrs. Novi can probably answer this one first, and then continued by Mrs. Alex after that.
Okay, it's such an interesting question, I think. Talking about 4.0 era, I think it's closely related with the digital revolution as technology plays a big role. And I'm sure that we all face the same challenges in this era, especially for the publisher. And I would say that this new era, I think we need to rethink our ways to do a business, because old ways seems to quite not the old ways are not relevant, no longer relevant now. And I think we need to find new strategies and also transformation to be able to adapt to new disruption era. And but I think beside its challenges, this 4.0 era also offers us some new possibilities. For example, now we know that our readers have more option for book reading. New platforms emerge, and previously we only know about printed book and, well, yeah, maybe ebook. But now we can read books while cooking our food at the kitchen, for example, by listening to audiobooks. And on the other hand, for the authors, I think the authors also have more chances to publish their works, as now more becoming more popular in Indonesia. Wattpad, for example, it becomes a new media for the authors, for new writers especially, to share their thoughts. And we have witnessed many Wattpad that have turned into published books. So I think besides its challenges, it indeed also offers us some new possibilities. And I also think that in this new era, we need to shift our mindset. Previously, we always thought about competition. We always find a way to compete with others, how to be the best in the industry. But I think in this new era, I think collaboration is much more needed now. As what they always say, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, just let's go together. So I think in this 4.0 era, I think collaboration is much more needed. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mrs. Novi. Now, what about Mrs. Alex?
I don't think I could answer it better than Novi just did, to be quite honest. But I think the word I would use, and it really links to what Novi's just said, is the industry's become more dynamic. And in the process of becoming more dynamic, we've had to diversify as publishers. And this is really what Novi's just touched on. And yes, it's challenging. We're seeing the decline of print, which is inevitable. Springer Nature collectively was pioneering in developing its e-strategy quite early on. And I think that's stood us in good stead in terms of survival in the publishing industry. Of course, we don't really think of the individual book so much as also the e-collection. We are selling the e-collections to libraries, and that is what Springer is offering, is a wealth or portfolio of knowledge. So again, we think just beyond the individual book in that sense, that that also allows us to publish some topics that are quite niche. And I know this is a question that comes up often from LIPI Press authors, is, how, of course, we're thinking about readership in terms of breadth. We wanted to have a regional appeal, but just because it's got an Indonesian specific focus, it doesn't mean that it's not going to attract a wider readership. So again, that does allow us that flexibility to publish in more niche areas, or what other maybe smaller publishers might consider very niche areas. But to speak more to what Novi has said, yes, it's about diversification in the medium. So things like audiobooks, things like integrating video. We're starting to see some of our authors do online courses. It's about thinking about MOOCs and things like, something that's very topical to this discussion, auto-translation. So yes, we've got a long way to go before we can, auto-translate a book in philosophy. But for other disciplines in the sciences, and say computer science, we have already produced some machine-generated content. So this is very exciting. It's very interesting, and it's changing the way knowledge is being produced and the way that knowledge is being consumed, particularly in this pandemic era. We really need to think about how people learn and how people engage with our products. And more than anything, the last year has shown that doing things like this, like podcasts, is going to become more and more important in connecting our authors with that research community, with the with the learning community, be it at university level or in the case of textbooks, undergraduates, even at school level with Macmillan Education. Yeah, we really have to change the way we think about knowledge consumption. I would just like to touch on one other aspect that Novi hadn't touched on, and that's also open access. So that's a conversation that's being had more and more, particularly in Europe and North America, but it's a conversation that's emerging in this part of the world. And Indonesia is one of the leading open access funders in Asia. And I think that's also important, that we're looking at how to make knowledge more accessible by making it open. So that's a conversation I'd really like to see happen more with LIPI Press and with our Indonesian partners more broadly. It's all about improving the access to information.
Sorry, Binta, I would like to point that out. So thank you, Alex, for saying that about open access. Yeah, I think that's why now LIPI Press has taken its challenge also. So we try to adapt to the new era. So we are also trying to do the open access for our publication. But of course, we need to learn more from Springer about this. So I'm very eager and I'm very enthusiastic to talk about open access with you, Alex, more.
Great, Novi, thanks.
Okay, roger that. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, wonderful sights and response indeed. Right, guys? Okay, now on to the next question. Mrs. Novi, are there any special or extra tips so that our writings will have a big chance to be published by LIPI Press or published by the path of co-publishing? For example, from the aspect of the selection of the title, or is there any kind of extra preparation that someone has to take? Please share your tips for me and also the Sahabat LIPI listeners out there who are very dying to know. Please.
Okay, thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question, as I got that kind of question a lot. So I think one of the most important things when an author wants to send a manuscript to a publisher, especially an international publisher like Springer, I think he needs to prepare a good book proposal. And I think Alex will agree with that. So the book proposal, it's the first thing that a publisher will look into. So you really need to prepare your time and to do like the best book proposal. You have to make your book proposal stand out among other book proposals that have been submitted to the same publishing house. Well, you don't know how many book proposals the publisher receive every day, right? And in terms of title, I think people say that don't judge a book by its cover. But in reality, I think most of the readers will definitely firstly looking at the cover, hence the title. So I really think that the title have one of the biggest role in deciding whether your books will attract your readers or not. So I think when you want to create your title, try to use a word that is not too long. So avoid too long words. And then because it might sound ambiguous, also unclear, and maybe a bit boring also. I will say that try to use the 3C's formula. So concise, communicative, and clear. Well, maybe 4C's and eye-catching. I think that's all.
Okay, Sahabat LIPI, there you are, your answer. Thank you, Mrs. Novi. Now, for those of you who don't know, especially Sahabat LIPI listeners out there, 3 books that published by Springer are carrying a social theme. Among them are Foreign Policy and Energy Security Issues in Indonesia, 6 Decades of Indonesia-China Relations, and the Politics of Migration in Indonesia and Beyond. Mrs. Alex, I want to ask, what kind of work does Springer accept for publication? Are there any specific criteria from Springer for someone or some people who want to publish a book?
Thanks. Excellent question. If I may just backtrack slightly to what Novi said and about the book proposal, I really always encourage authors to also think about their book proposal like a CV. You're selling your topic, your research, and how it might make a contribution. And again, that really links to this question as well. What are we looking for? We're looking for good quality research, and we're looking primarily for how that text is situated within the literature that has gone before it. So identifying similar titles, competing titles, complementary titles, both within Springer's portfolio and in the context of competing publishers' works, is very important. You need to show an awareness of how your book is going to be positioned within the market, who's going to read it, and what are the 3 unique selling points that really set your book apart. So I'm always a little bit worried when I get a book proposal form that says there are no competing titles, and also those authors that struggle to come up with those 3 USPs. They might put 1 in, and it's like, it should be easy. It should be a very organic process of saying what makes your book interesting and why you would want to read it, or why people within your community would want to read it. Again, to touch on what Novi had said previously about titles, search engine optimization is increasingly important, particularly if we're linking back to the question on, working in the 4.0 era. As Novi said, like, you don't want to judge a book by its cover. In the digital era, book covers are kind of redundant if you think about it. And within our readerships, people are going to pick up your book because it's the topic, based on the topic, right? So you need to be very careful in terms of how you craft your title and how you craft your abstracts and your marketing text in conveying that uniqueness, and also link that into your title to make it catchy, to make it. You don't want to make it fluffy as well. In the humanities, in particular, we love to be creative, and we love to make slightly obscure titles. And coming from an English background, literature background, I'm particularly guilty of that. But again, you've got to be very clear about how is that book going to reach your target readership, and that is really what we're looking at. We are very reliant as non-subject experts on peer reviewers too. So I should also emphasize that. I will get a proposal. I think it's a great proposal. It's comprehensive. It's well put together. But the peer reviewers are subject experts, and they know the literature better than anybody. And we are reliant on them to give that feedback and to make suggestions. I should also add as well that just because if you get a proposal and it's sent out for peer review, sometimes the criticism, and Novi knows this too, it can be quite hard. It can come across as quite harsh, but ultimately it's constructive. So especially for first-time authors, I always want to say, don't be scared of the peer review process. The peer reviewers are ultimately there to ask the questions that your readers are going to be asking in terms of how you can improve that work, how you can make it better. And that's why I think it's really great to send a proposal ahead of a full manuscript, because those issues will be identified early on the process, and those questions will be asked early on in the writing process. To your question in closing on this rather long answer, what do we look for?
No problem.
Again, novelty. That's what we're looking for. But we also appreciate that it's whatever you're writing is being built on a long-standing legacy of knowledge that's gone before it, and you need to just show an awareness of how your work is built from that, expanding on it, and making a contribution in your field.
Oh, I see. Wow. Wow. That's such a wonderful and detailed response from Mrs. Alex. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Long-winded, maybe. Sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. No problem at all. Now, Mrs. Alex and Mrs. Novi, publishing a book definitely requires a very long process and editing, right? What are the problems you often encounter during the publishing process? Maybe now Mrs. Alex can answer this first.
Oh, I think Novi would be actually the one to answer, because she's often relaying a lot of reviewer feedback from me back to the authors and then back again. So, sorry, the question was some of the common challenges, yes? It is, again, different when you're working with translated works. And I really want to let Novi take this answer because I think she's going to be better equipped in speaking to the challenges of translation. It's not only about finding translators who are, have competency and bilingual competency in both Bahasa Indonesia and English, but also subject knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's a real challenge to find translators who can do that. So I would say that's the common challenge facing our LIPI Press collaborated project is quality of translation. And of course, the translation project takes a lot longer, which also means that sometimes the data has to be updated. It requires a lot of revision when we're doing the spring edition, because maybe the LIPI Press edition was published 2-3 years ago, and now it needs contextualization. If you're talking about public health, you've got to talk about the pandemic, right? You can't really have that conversation without the contextualization of the current climate. So updating and also, again, translation. I would say those are the two biggest challenges.
I see. What about Mrs. Novi?
So I couldn't agree more with you, Alex. So yeah, our biggest challenge, I think, one of them is the translation, because as what I have said before, mostly we receive the manuscript in Indonesian. And when we want to send to Springer, of course, it should be translated first in English. So yeah, it's quite challenging to find the most appropriate translator for a work, for a manuscript, because someone may have a good English skill, but if he doesn't have the knowledge needed for the translation, so it's the translation result may not be good. So it's LIPI Press always try to find the translator which have the similar background as the book that is being translated. And I think another obstacle would be the commitment from the author, because it's publishing a book. Indeed, it's a very long process, and it involves many parties. And during my 5 years handling the co-publishing between LIPI and Springer, I think I have witnessed some of the authors have failed in finishing their books. When you send your manuscript to a publisher, usually it will go through a review process, a substantial review. And after the review, you will get the feedback from the reviewers. And sometimes, or should I say most of the time, the revision stage, it's quite tiring. And sometimes it's also time consuming, because just what Alex has said, sometimes the reviewers ask for the authors to update the data. So it's sometimes it's really time consuming. That's why some of the authors, they failed and fighting till the end. They just gave up. So I really think that commitment is one of the most important key in publishing process. Besides, I also think that deciding to which publisher you send your manuscript is also quite important. So I really suggest for the authors out there to do your own research before you send your manuscript. I think that's all.
Wow, I see. So that's why publishers always took their time in publishing new books, huh? Thank you for the answers to both of you. Now, on the enclosure of this podcast, what are your hopes for Springer and LIPI Press in this co-publishing collaboration? Maybe Mrs. Novi can answer this first.
Well, we really hope that we can continue this good cooperation between LIPI and Springer. And we hope that we can expand our collaboration to reach a bigger audience in the future. And of course, we are expecting to publish more titles through this co-publishing scheme. And hopefully by doing so, we can accommodate more Indonesian authors to have their books published and also disseminated across the globe.
Okay, I see. What about Mrs. Alex?
again, yes, touching on what Novi said, expanding the collaboration is a conversation that we are having at the moment. So, of course, it started out in humanities and social sciences, but of course, being connected to the Indonesian Institute of Science, which is publishing really, cutting-edge research and in the sciences, as well as humanities and social sciences, or predominantly social sciences, should I say. I don't see why we can't look at expanding it to include other disciplines, and that's the conversation that we are having at the moment. And that requires, of course, identifying titles in other disciplines that may lend themselves to co-publication. So that's certainly part of the conversation going forward. I'd also like to add that I really noticed in my 3.5 years of working with LIPI Press that we've become more efficient in the translation process. I really, at the most recent manuscript, and again, this is not credit that goes to my side of the coin, it goes fully to Novia and her team. But the quality of translation, I think, has improved. And the most recent manuscript we've been submitted, from what I've seen, is definitely come in leaps and bounds from the first manuscript. So again, that learning process is really paying dividends now. I think we've got a more well-oiled machine in terms of what we need, and the topics that are of interest and the topics that are relevant for co-publication. We have a much clearer sense of that. And also keeping that conversation quite fluid. One of the things we do when we renew the co-publishing agreement is look at the catalogue on LIPI Press's side and identify those titles that we think may lend themselves to co-publication as a spring edition. But also when new titles are coming in, even though that agreement has a 3-year term, new titles are constantly being published under LIPI Press. And Novi will write to me and say, we've just published this book this year. Is this a topic that will be of interest to Springer? And it's keeping that conversation alive. And that's what I'd like to see going forward, is not only expansion to other disciplines, but also just keeping that conversation ticking along in terms of new projects.
Okay, wow. All right, folks, boys and girls of Sahabat LIPI, I'm here to announce you that I have been reborn as a new man, bestowed by brand new knowledge in this podcast, thanks to these two amazing speakers. Wow, thank you, Mrs. Novi and Mrs. Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Bintang.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, thank you again, Mrs. Alex and Mrs. Novi, who are willing to attend and taking your time to share your experience and knowledge with all Sahabat LIPI all around the world. And thank you. We really appreciate that, especially also for your amazing suggestions that are very in line with this National Book Day regarding the importance of the role of publishers in delivering articles worldwide that can be read by billions of people all around the world. And now, wow, time really flies when we're having fun, right? Sahabat LIPI, we have reached the end of our podcast in episode 5. Oh, yeah, I see. Hopefully, our conversation about this publication can open our insights to the importance of the role of the publisher in delivering an article into a book and can be read by many people. Thank you, Sahabat LIPI, for listening and enjoying this episode. Please also look forward to other important and interesting information in the next LIPI Press podcast. Podcast LIPI Press, podcast penerbit ilmiah masa kini. See you and have a nice day. Ananda Faturrahman Bintang, signing off.